The first time that blue SUV came tearing down our private hunting trail, my granddad muttered something I'll never forget. Well, there goes the neighborhood. She just declared war and brought a latte to a gunfight. We hadn't even finished setting up our game cameras when that shiny blue SUV bounced down the gravel road like it owned the forest. Dust rose behind it like a miniature tornado, the kind that seems to follow entitled people wherever they go. She skidded to a stop near our old oak tree, tires screeching, and stepped out like she was about to serve eviction papers to the entire wilderness. Her name was Becky Lormont, vice president of a suburban HOA 2 ridges over, and that day she decided our woods, the same land that had been in our family for generations, somehow belonged to her community association. Granddad, who everyone called Walter, sat on a folding chair by the campfire sipping from his dented thermos, the kind that had survived more winters than Becky had logic. I was halfway through tying a camouflage tarp over our deer blind when she stormed toward us, waving her phone like it was a sheriff's badge. "You can't have permanent structures here," she shouted, in that nasal tone people get when they think money equals authority. "These wooden huts violate community standards." I froze mid-hammer, glancing at Grandpa. He didn't even flinch. He set down his thermos and looked up slowly, like a bear deciding whether a squirrel was worth the energy. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "this ain't your community. This is private hunting land." Becky smiled in that condescending way city folks do when they think they're teaching you something obvious. "Actually," she said, tapping her phone screen, "the extended zoning map for our HOA includes the entire ridge and adjacent usage trails, which means this area falls under our jurisdiction." Grandpa blinked. "Jurisdiction?" he repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time. Then he chuckled, low and rough. "Lady, this land's been in my family since Theodore Roosevelt thought bears were furniture. You think a town meeting and some newsletter gives you rights out here?" "Oh, I don't think," she replied, still smirking. "I know." And with that, she started snapping pictures of our hunting stands, the shed we kept tools in, even my old rusted truck parked by the trees. I leaned over and whispered, "She's serious?" Grandpa didn't answer. He just picked up his old hunting knife and started sharpening a handful of thick, rusted railroad spikes he kept by the fire, the sound of metal scraping metal filling the silence. Becky stayed around 15 minutes, dropping off courtesy notices printed on cheap copy paper, stapled like school art projects. The pages were full of big, official-looking words: compliance, violation, aesthetic improvement, but all I saw was arrogance stapled to nonsense. Grandpa didn't even bother reading them. He tossed the papers straight into the fire. Becky gasped like he'd burned the Constitution. "You can't do that," she shrieked. Grandpa took a slow sip of coffee. "I just did," he said. "And next time, maybe I'll roast a marshmallow over it." That was the end of her first visit. She huffed back into her SUV, muttering something about enforcement escalation. Then she slammed the door, threw it into reverse, and as fate would have it, clipped the edge of a log Grandpa had placed there months earlier to mark a deer crossing. The back tire caught, her drink went flying, and her iced mocha exploded across her windshield like divine punctuation. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my hammer. "She's gonna be back, isn't she?" Grandpa nodded. "Oh, she'll be back. But next time, she won't get out so easy." That night, while I grilled venison over the fire, Grandpa disappeared into the tool shed and came back carrying a small wooden crate I hadn't seen in years. He placed it on the picnic table and opened it like a treasure chest. Inside were half a dozen heavy, rusted railroad spikes, thick as fingers and twice as stubborn. He laid them out neatly, one by one. "These," he said, "were pulled from the abandoned track north of here. They were built to stop trains. Reckon they'll stop a Karen too." "Grandpa," I said cautiously, "you're not planning to." He waved me off. "Relax. I ain't out to hurt nobody. Just enough to remind her that when you step on someone else's land, you might step into something sharp." By dawn, we were out at the trail's entrance, a narrow curve hidden by brush, the perfect blind spot. We dug small divots just off the gravel, laid the spikes in a scattered fan shape, and covered them with a light dusting of dirt and pine needles. Then we marked the spot on our map with red ink. Grandpa called it Becky's Bend. Sure enough, later that afternoon, the sound of her SUV came echoing through the trees again. That same angry rev, that same dust cloud. This time she didn't even slow down. She charged down the trail like she was leading a cavalry charge. 5 minutes later came the pop, a hiss, and the unmistakable sound of deflated ego. Her door slammed open. She stood there, staring at her shredded tire like it had betrayed her. "Sabotage," she yelled. "You're both going to jail." Grandpa stepped out from the trees, hands in his pockets, calm as ever. "Maybe," he said, "but you'll need to call someone first. And good luck getting cell service out here." I raised my phone and grinned. "Smile, Becky. You're on camera." She fumed, stomped, and finally called the one man dumb enough to listen. Deputy Carl, a young officer who meant well, but had the judgment of a golden retriever chasing its own tail. When he arrived 20 minutes later, she jumped into his arms metaphorically and started crying about harassment and property rights. Carl gave us a polite warning, then offered her a ride back into town while the tow truck came. I could tell by the way she looked at him. She'd already decided to make him her personal attack dog. 2 days later, she returned with Carl again. This time, she brought a manila folder so thick it could have been used as a doorstop. She marched right up to our deer blind and began shouting about Code 4B of the Scenic Regulation Policy. Grandpa folded his arms. "What neighborhood you talking about, ma'am? There ain't another house within 3 miles. Carl tried to step in. "Mr. Walters, maybe we can all just calm down and talk this out. Becky says her HOA has documentation showing this land is within their extended buffer zone." Grandpa pointed toward the old oak. "Son, you see that tree? That marks the start of my land. Been in the family since 1911. You go ahead and find any map in the county that says otherwise." Becky opened her mouth to interrupt, but he raised a hand. "And another thing, buffer zones don't mean ownership. They mean you can plant tulips and keep your dogs on leashes. Doesn't give you the right to march in here waving clipboards like Judge Judy with a GPS." Carl blinked, unsure which side of reality he should stand on. Becky, sensing control slipping, doubled down. "This isn't just about the structures," she snapped. "There have been multiple complaints about wildlife harassment and unauthorized fires." Grandpa raised an eyebrow. "Wildlife harassment? You mean hunting, on hunting land, during hunting season?" She scowled. "With crude traps and dangerous equipment. This is a violation of civil safety codes." Grandpa calmly pulled a folded sheet from his pocket and handed it to Carl. "That's our permit. Issued last week, valid till midwinter. Fire pits regulation size. Everything legal. You can call Bill at the department to confirm." Carl examined the paper like it might catch fire. Becky's face flushed crimson. She turned her fury on me. "He was recording me without consent. That's a privacy violation." I raised my phone. "Public confrontation on private land," I said. "Don't worry, I blurred your face. The internet still guessed, though." She stormed off toward her Jeep, muttering obscenities. As fate would have it, she hit another sharp root on the way out. The tire hissed, then collapsed completely. Carl just sighed. "Ma'am," he said, "maybe it's time to let it go." But she didn't. That evening, she launched a full-blown social media campaign, a post titled "Dangerous Men Squatting on Public Trail." She called us violent, posted photos of our deer blind, and claimed we'd built illegal compounds. We only found out because Grandpa's old fishing buddy, Bert, sent screenshots with the note. "Looks like war, boys. Need backup." The next morning, we got our first drone. It buzzed over camp like a giant metal mosquito, hovering just low enough to rattle your nerves. Jared climbed an old pine tree, waited until it got close, then swung his rake like a baseball bat. The drone cracked in two and spiraled into the brambles. Becky screamed from somewhere near the trailhead. "That's federal property. You just committed a crime." Grandpa yelled back, "Lady, if that thing flies lower than the squirrels, it's fair game." Later that night, she tried to call, pretending to be a ranger threatening us with fines. But the real ranger, Tom, was a family friend. When Grandpa called him, he laughed so hard he wheezed. "Becky, the one who tried to get my niece expelled for parking crooked? Tell her to stay the hell off your land." At that point, Grandpa decided to make it official. We sat down with a topographical map, marking every entry point, every soft patch of mud, every blind corner. "You're making a battle plan," I said. He smiled. "Exactly." He labeled one section mudslide alley, another no signal curve, and the final one the pit. The goal wasn't harm, it was humility. Sure enough, Becky returned that weekend, this time dressed like a discount park ranger. Orange vest with community enforcement taped on the back in black duct tape. She had binoculars around her neck, a clipboard in one hand, and a bullhorn on her belt. She looked like a mall cop who'd lost her mall. "This is your final notice," she declared, handing Grandpa yet another folder. "I've submitted documentation to the HOA's legal committee and issued a requisition for code enforcement. You are officially in violation." Grandpa didn't say a word. He just reached into his truck, pulled out a laminated copy of the property deed, and handed it over. The paper was yellowed, edges torn, signed and notarized from over a century ago. Becky frowned. "This doesn't mean anything. Historical ownership does not supersede modern jurisdiction." "Oh, it does here," Grandpa said, tapping the county seal at the bottom. "This ain't your pool gate, Becky. This is hunting ground. And it's mine." She stuffed the paper into her folder like it was a grocery receipt, then started live streaming. "This is Becky Lormont documenting yet another example of rural aggression. These individuals are threatening public safety on unregulated land. I am requesting community backup." I leaned over to Grandpa. "Did she just call for backup like this is a zombie movie?" He grinned. "Time to show her we've got side quests." That afternoon, we finished digging the pit. Just deep enough to trap a back tire, shallow enough not to injure anyone. We covered it with a thin sheet of plywood, sprinkled leaves on top, and sprayed the area with skunk scent, a final touch of country perfume. Right before dusk, her SUV returned. She followed one of our fake trail markers, turned a little too far right, and with a loud thunk, the front of her car dropped into the hole. Wheels spun uselessly. A cloud of humiliation rose thicker than dust. She jumped out, shrieking, "You've endangered my property." Jared climbed down from the deer blind, holding his camcorder. "You okay down there? Looks like your Jeep's stuck in its feelings." She tried to call for help, but there was no signal. She ended up walking out, covered in mud and rage. The tow truck driver, an old friend of Grandpa's, laughed all the way through pulling her Jeep out the next morning. "You sure know how to give city folks a country welcome," he said. But Becky wasn't done. The next weekend, she returned to the base of the trail and installed a big vinyl banner that read Community Watch Zone, entry monitored. Under it, she mounted a motion camera that spent 3 days filming nothing but squirrels. Then she filed a complaint with the State Game Commission claiming we were illegally baiting deer. Ranger Tom himself showed up, took one look at her paperwork, and nearly cried laughing. He ate cornbread with us for an hour, signed our inspection as all clear, and scribbled a note at the bottom. "Also, tell Becky I'm not her errand boy." At that point, we decided it was time to fight stupidity with art. Jared built a scarecrow using old clothes, a fake badge, and one of Becky's discarded flyers. We propped it near the trailhead with a sign that said "Official Trail Marshal, trespassers will be laughed at." The next morning, Becky spotted it and screamed from half a mile away. Within hours, she'd posted online about militia intimidation tactics. Bert texted us, "Militia? You mean the scarecrow?" That's when we realized she wasn't fighting for rules anymore. She was fighting for control. A week later, she escalated again, rolling in with a rented flatbed truck loaded with orange cones, laminated signs, and a portable gate. She was building a checkpoint. "This area is now under temporary civic administration," she announced proudly. I stared at the mess of cones and plastic and said, "Becky, you're putting dollar store decorations on land that doesn't belong to you. The more junk you pile up, the more it looks like a clown parade took a wrong turn." Her 2 teenage helpers shifted awkwardly, muttered something about needing to call their moms, and left. Jared filmed the whole thing. "Say hi to everyone online, Becky." "This footage is illegal," she shrieked. "That's too bad," he said. "The internet disagrees." She finally packed up, muttering about escalation. 2 days later, we hit her with Operation Ranger Becky. Jared borrowed his dad's old Forest Ranger uniform, complete with hat, badge, and clipboard. He stood at the trailhead writing on forms like a government inspector. When Becky arrived, she almost burst with joy. Finally, someone's taking this seriously. Jared didn't even look up. "Ma'am, remain behind the barrier. You're the one under investigation for unauthorized signage, artificial barriers, and drone overflights. Do you have your paperwork?" She froze. "What? No, I'm the one reporting violations." "Then your name's in the report now," he said, jotting something down. She sputtered, turned bright red, and stormed off. That night, She posted again. Rogue Ranger Harris's concerned citizen. Bert sent us the link and said, "She's hit peak Becky." We made a new sign the next morning. "Congratulations, you have reached peak Becky." Beneath it, a smaller plaque read, "This moment has been recorded for training purposes." By then, the whole county was laughing. Becky had become a local legend. The suburban crusader who tried to start a one-woman HOA war in the woods and lost to a scarecrow and a uniform. But she still wasn't done. A week later, she returned with backup, 5 older HOA volunteers wearing fanny packs and confusion. They carried clipboards, walkie-talkies, and one even had a metal detector strapped to his back. Becky led them like a general leading her troops, pointing at hand-drawn maps. "We'll document every violation by sundown." Grandpa radioed me from the cabin. "They look like ants on a hot skillet. You want me to start Phase 2? "Affirmative," I said. Phase 2 was Grandpa's masterpiece, psychological deterrence. As Becky's crew moved deeper into the forest, hidden speakers began playing eerie recordings. Growling bears, distant howls, whispered voices saying, "You shouldn't be here." The volunteers froze every few feet, eyes wide. Then came the mannequins, old store dummies dressed in ghillie suits. One toppled over right beside them. They screamed and ran. Becky yelled after them, "Come back. We need you for soil readings." But it was useless. They abandoned her, scattering like pigeons. She was alone when she triggered Grandpa's latest invention, a hidden metal grate that sprang upward, trapping her like a cartoon villain. She wasn't hurt, just stuck, arms flailing. Grandpa appeared minutes later in full sheriff cosplay, hat, boots, fake badge, the works. "Ma'am," he said gravely, "you are hereby detained for theatrical and educational purposes." "This is unlawful," she shrieked. He smiled. "Actually, it's performance art. The title's authority meets unmoved mountain. You're playing yourself." I stepped out clapping slowly. Jared followed, filming everything. I pulled out a laminated card and read, "You have the right to remain ridiculous. Anything you say can and will be laughed at in future HOA meetings." She roared, rattled the bars, swore lawsuits, then stormed off once released. That night her video claiming she'd been kidnapped by backwoods vigilantes hit the internet and went viral for all the wrong reasons. 500,000 views, countless memes, and not a single soul on her side. We thought that was the end of it, but Becky always had one more tantrum left. The next morning, Grandpa handed me drone photos showing a brand new path carved through the eastern woods. She'd hired a small crew and a bulldozer to cut a backdoor trail straight through sacred ground, the same spot where Grandpa's old dog was buried. We didn't call the sheriff. We didn't post online. We handled it the old-fashioned way. That night, we opened the box. Inside were coyote scent, expired fireworks, a taxidermy raccoon, and a baby doll with glowing red eyes. We set them up along the new path, added a wooden sign that read "The Land Remembers," and went to bed. When Becky showed up the next morning with her contractors, the forest came alive. The smell hit first, sharp and musky. Then came the soundbox whispering, "Go back." A confetti-blasting raccoon popped out of a bush, followed by firecrackers buried under logs. The crew screamed and ran. Becky stayed just long enough to get drenched by a hidden sprinkler system. She slipped, fell in the mud, and fled. That was the final straw. The next day, she returned with a camera crew, trying to film a documentary about rural extremists. Grandpa walked straight into the shot holding the original deed, stamped and notarized, signed by his grandfather in 1911. "This land's been in my family longer than you've been breathing," he said. "You want a scandal? Here's one. A suburban narcissist trying to annex private property for her fantasy HOA kingdom." The cameraman blinked, turned to Becky, and quietly asked, "Is this true?" She mumbled something about pending approvals, but it was over. They packed up and left. After that, the posts vanished, the trail fell silent, and peace finally returned. That night, sitting by the fire, Jared asked, "You think she learned her lesson?" Grandpa carved something into a piece of oak, private land. "Not for sale, not for bullies." He smiled faintly. "Maybe she did," he said. "But if not, the woods'll teach her again." I looked out at the trees swaying gently in the night breeze. The frogs sang, the stars blinked through the branches, and I thought about how some people never understand boundaries until they run headfirst into them. If you've ever had your own Becky, someone who thinks their authority extends farther than it should, someone who believes paper rules outrank common sense. You know exactly what I mean. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done? Would you fight her, ignore her, or get creative like Grandpa? Because out here, justice doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it wears boots and smells faintly of skunk spray.